Hello, welcome to Friday the 15th of January 2021's English lesson. Our target today is I can make comparisons across texts. So we are going to be comparing the Noah Emporium with another text. And I'll let you into a secret, that other text is Harry Potter. And I know lots of you love Harry Potter. Don't worry if you don't, because we are going to read it together and I will explain what we are doing as we go. We are going to start this lesson by reading chapter 4, which is called The Monster. It is on page 28, and if you have a look before the chapter starts, it says Edinburgh, December 1878. And my question to you is, why is a date given? Can you comment below with your ideas of why the author has included the date? The knock on the door of Castleford Home for Lost Boys came at precisely 5 minutes to midnight. At first the call went unanswered. The man at the door waited patiently, flicking gathering crystals of falling snow from his shoulders. After a while he took up his silver-topped cane and rapped hard on the door 3 times. A minute or so passed before flustered footsteps could be heard from within, and the sound of jangling keys and heavy locks. The door swung open. The man inside was wearing a nightgown. He was stout and fat-necked, a neatly trimmed beard the only evidence of where the chin ended and the neck began. "Can I help you?" he asked, frowning over a pair of spectacles. The visitor nodded. "I believe so. Are you the master of the orphanage?" "I am," said the master. "And who may you be?" The man at the door, who had been standing a step below the master, stepped up so that they were standing on level ground. He was much taller than the average man, over 6 feet in height, with powerful shoulders and a square-set jaw. His neatly cropped silver hair and goatee seemed to sparkle in the warm glow of the lamps. His eyes were cold, icy blue. "I'm here about the boy," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. After a moment of hesitation, the master's eyes widened. "Yes," he said, "yes, please come in. Get out of the snow. Warm yourself." The tall man nodded once, stepped into the home for lost boys. It might have been warmer out in the snow. "Can I offer you a drink, Mr. Sharp? Vindictus Sharp?" "No drink, thank you. Best see the boy as soon as possible." "If you don't mind my saying, Mr. Sharp," said the master, you may have picked a more reasonable hour to visit." "The asylum does not wish to draw attention to the boy," the tall man replied. "Such cases attract stigma, unless, of course, you wish the child's condition to become common knowledge." The master shook his head. "No, no, this will do fine." "Very well," said Vindictus Sharp. "This boy, he has been here since birth?" The master nodded. "More or less." "And have these incidents happened regularly?" Again the master gave a nod. His face had transformed at the mere mention of the boy, taken on a haunted, hollow sort of look. "Do you think you can do something about it?" he asked, clasping his hands. Sharp raised an eyebrow. "May I speak with him?" he said. The master picked up a lamp and led Vindictus Sharp through the entrance hall to a caretaker's office, where he picked a large key from a hook on the wall. After this they walked a passageway adorned with the grand portraits of previous masters and beneficiaries of the home. "Watch your step," said the master, as they began to descend a dark, twisting staircase. The stairs opened out to another corridor, this one lit by a solitary gas lamp. The place smelled of damp and dirt and faintly of disinfectant. "You keep him down here?" said Sharp. The master, who was a pace or two ahead, turned, and his face was a white mask of shame. "We've no choice," he said. Then, almost as a way of apology, he added, "He is very well fed, and we let him out into the open air once a week. There are many children in this city who have it much worse." Sharp did not answer. They reached a door at the end of the corridor. The master took the rusted key and placed it in the keyhole. It was stiff, and it took him a few attempts to open the lock. He reached for the doorknob, but Sharp's gloved hand blocked him. "I think I will take it from here," he said. The master stared for a moment. "Alone? Are you sure?" You are welcome to wait here, said Sharp. But if I am but if I am to evaluate the boy, then yes, I must speak with him privately. In spite of the cold, the master wiped a bead of sweat from the end of his nose. Very well, he said. If it is necessary, I suppose, but I will be here by the door should you need me. Vindictus Sharp's mouth twitched. It may have been a smile, but he had turned towards the door before the master could properly tell. He reached for the handle and slowly opened the door. The room was small and square. The only items of furniture were a small bed made from cast iron and a simple wooden bookcase packed with volumes of various size and thickness. At the foot of the bed sat a boy. He was perhaps 10 years old, scrawny, almost to the point of being skeletal, with a mop of ragged wild hair. At first glance, Sharp thought him unremarkable, save for his eyes, which were the angry grey of a thundery ocean sky. Sharp closed the door in the master's peering face. His gaze returned to the child. "Are you here to take me away?" said the boy. Sharp brushed a smudge from the silver handle of his cane. "That depends," he said, and he indicated the bookcase. "You like to read?" The boy nodded. "I love it. The words let me go somewhere else in my head, away from here." Vindictus Sharp scanned the contents of the bookcase. There were some children's stories there, among them Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Treasure Island, but there were also books that were not for children. "You have read all of these?" he asked, tapping the complete works of Shakespeare with his cane. The boy nodded. The tall man bowed his head. "Impressive! Tell me, are you aware that the master is scared of you?" The grey of the boy's eyes seemed to deepen and intensify. "Everyone's scared of me, and they should be." "And why might that be?" asked Sharp. The boy fixed him with a cold stare. "Because," he said, "I can do things that they can't. I can do things that nobody can." He nodded towards the door. "They call me a monster." Vindictus Sharp's face remained as blank as the walls. "Show me," he said. The boy's gaze travelled to the bookcase. At once it began to tremble. Several books tumbled to the floor, and then one of the books, bound in green leather, shot away from the shelves as though it had been thrown. But this book did not hit the floor. Its pages opened and began to flap, and the book circled over Sharp's head like an awkward bird. After 30 seconds or so, the book thudded to the bare stone floor. Sharp's face remained calm, but the boy could see that something in his eyes had changed. Everything all right in there?" came the master's voice from out in the hallway. Neither the boy nor the tall man answered. "Why aren't you scared of me?" asked the boy. Sharp said nothing. For the first time the boy was aware of how strikingly blue his eyes were. Without warning, every remaining book on the shelves soared into the air and began to circle and swoop around the room, never colliding, though there were many of them. The boy's mouth fell open. He watched and watched until Sharp glanced towards the bookcase, and in seconds the books were back, each in exactly the spot it had previously occupied. Vindictus Sharp flattened out a crease on one of his leather gloves. His blue eyes met the grey eyes of the boy. "I am not afraid of you," he said, "because I am a monster too." A doctor from the city asylum arrived at the orphanage early next morning. He had been called upon to evaluate one of the boys, a child who had been involved in unexplained and occasionally violent incidents. When the master led him down the narrow stairs to the dark corridor and opened the door, he was at a loss to explain where the boy might have gone or why several of the books were missing from the bookcase. The doors to the building were locked immediately, and every inch of the place searched, but there was no trace of the child. He had simply vanished. The master had no recollection of ever having answered the door the previous night. He possessed no memory of Vindictus Sharp in his impeccable suit, or how he had led him to the boy in the basement. He certainly could not remember how he himself had helped to pack the child's belongings and seen them safely out. That night, and every night thereafter, the master would dream of a man and a boy walking together through the falling snow. Though he ran, he could never quite catch them up. So, Year 5, make sense of that chapter you have just read. Who do you think the little boy in the orphanage was? Why do you think the master can't remember any of it happening? And we are going today to be comparing that extract from the Nowhere Emporium to an extract from Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. And in your packs, I have printed the extract for you to follow along with. We are going to read it together, talk about it, and in the link below, there is also a YouTube clip of the extract of Harry Potter, so you can watch it as well. While we're reading, I want you to think, how is this similar to the Nowhere Emporium chapter, and how is this different? Okay? This time, said Dumbledore, we are going to enter my memory. I think you will find it both rich in detail and satisfyingly accurate. After you, Harry. Harry bent over the pensieve. His face broke the cool surface of the memory, and then he was falling through darkness again. Seconds later, his feet hit firm ground. He opened his eyes and found that he and Dumbledore were standing in a bustling, old-fashioned London street. There I am, said Dumbledore brightly, pointing ahead of them to a tall figure crossing the road in front of a horse-drawn milk cart. This younger Albus Dumbledore's long hair and beard were auburn. Having reached their side of the street, he strode off along the pavement, drawing many curious glances due to the flamboyantly cut suit of plum velvet that he was wearing. Nice suit, sir, said Harry, before he could stop himself, but Dumbledore merely chuckled as they followed his younger self a short distance. Harry and the two Dumbledores entered the room, and Mrs. Cole closed the door on them. It was a small, bare room, with nothing in it except an old wardrobe, a wooden chair, and an iron bedstead. A boy was sitting on top of the grey blankets, his legs stretched out in front of him, holding a book. There was no trace of the gaunt in Tom Riddle's face. Merope had got her dying wish. He was his handsome father in miniature, tall for 11 years old, dark-haired and pale. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Dumbledore's eccentric appearance. There was a moment's silence. How do you do, Tom? Said Dumbledore, walking forward and holding out his hand. The boy hesitated, then took it, and they shook hands. Dumbledore drew up the hard wooden chair beside Riddle, so that the pair of them looked rather like a hospital patient and visitor. I am Professor Dumbledore. Professor? Repeated Riddle. He looked wary. Is that like, Doctor? What are you here for? Did she get you in to have a look at me? He was pointing at the door through which Mrs. Cole had just left. No, no, said Dumbledore, smiling. I don't believe you, said Riddle. She wants me looked at, doesn't she? Tell the truth. He spoke the last 3 words with a ringing force that was almost shocking. It was a command, and it sounded as though he had given it many times before. His eyes had widened, and he was glaring at Dumbledore, who made no response except to continue smiling pleasantly. After a few seconds, Riddle stopped glaring, though he looked, if anything, warier still. Who are you? I have told you. My name is Professor Dumbledore, and I work at a school called Hogwarts. I have come to offer you a place at my school, your new school, if you would like to come. Riddle's reaction to this was most surprising. He leapt from the bed and backed away from Dumbledore, looking furious. You can't kid me. The asylum, that's where you're from, isn't it? Professor, yes, of course. Well, I'm not going, see? That old cat's the one who should be in the asylum. I never did anything to little Amy Benson or Dennis Bishop, and you can ask them, they'll tell you. I'm not from the asylum, said Dumbledore patiently. I am a teacher, and if you will sit down calmly, I shall tell you about Hogwarts. Of course, if you would rather not come to the school, nobody will force you. I'd like to see them try, sneered Riddle. Hogwarts, Dumbledore went on, as though he had not heard Riddle's last words, is a school for people with special abilities. I'm not mad! I know that you're not mad. Hogwarts is not a school for mad people. It is a school of magic. There was silence. Riddle had frozen, his face expressionless, but his eyes were flickering back and forth between each of Dumbledore's, as though trying to catch one of them lying. Magic? He repeated in a whisper. That's right, said Dumbledore. It's magic? What I can do? What is it that you can do? All sorts, breathed Riddle. A flush of excitement was rising up his neck into his hollow cheeks. He looked fevered. I can make filings move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want them to do without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. I can make them hurt if I want to. His legs were trembling. He stumbled forward and sat down on the bed again, staring at his hands, his head bowed as though in a prayer. I knew I was different, he whispered to his own quivering fingers. I knew I was special. Always I knew there was something. Well, you were right. You were quite right, said Dumbledore, who was no longer smiling but watching Riddle intently. You are a wizard. Riddle lifted his head. His face was transfigured. There was a wild happiness upon it, yet for some reason it did not make him better looking. On the contrary, his finely carved features seemed somehow rougher, his expression almost bestial. Are you a wizard too? Yes, I am. Prove it, said Riddle at once, in the same commanding tone he had used when he had said, Tell the truth. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. If, as I take it, you are accepting your place at Hogwarts. Of course I am. Then you will address me as Professor or Sir. Riddle's expression hardened for the most fleeting moment before he said, in an unrecognisably polite voice, I'm sorry, sir. I meant, please, Professor, could you show me? Harry was sure that Dumbledore was going to refuse, that he would tell Riddle there would be plenty of time for practical demonstrations at Hogwarts, that they were currently in a building full of muggles and must therefore be cautious. To his great surprise, however, Dumbledore drew his wand from an inside pocket of his suit jacket, pointed it at the shabby wardrobe in the corner, and gave the wand a casual flick. The wardrobe burst into flames. Riddle jumped to his feet. Harry could hardly blame him for howling in shock and rage. All his worldly possessions must be in there. But even as Riddle rounded on Dumbledore, the flames vanished, leaving the wardrobe completely undamaged. Riddle stared from the wardrobe to Dumbledore. Then, his expression greedy, he pointed at the wand. Where can I get one of them? All in good time, said Dumbledore. I think there is something trying to get out of your wardrobe. And sure enough, a faint rattling could be heard from inside of it. For the first time, Riddle looked frightened. Open the door, said Dumbledore. Riddle hesitated, then crossed the room and threw open the wardrobe door. On the topmost shelf, above a rail of threadbare clothes, a small cardboard box was shaking and rattling as though there were several frantic mice trapped inside it. Take it out, said Dumbledore. Riddle took down the quaking box. He looked unnerved. Is there anything in that box that you ought not to have? Asked Dumbledore. Riddle threw Dumbledore a long, clear, calculating look. Yes, I suppose so, sir, he said finally in an expressionless voice. Open it, said Dumbledore. Riddle took off the lid and tipped the contents onto his bed without looking at them. Harry, who had expected to see something much more exciting, saw a mess of small, everyday objects. A yo-yo, a silver thimble, and a tarnished mouth organ among them. Once free of the box, they stopped quivering and lay quite still upon the thin blankets. You will return them to their owners with your apologies, said Dumbledore calmly, putting his wand back into his jacket. I shall know whether it has been done, and be warned, thieving is not tolerated at Hogwarts. I can speak to snakes. I found out when we've been to the country on trips. They find me, they whisper to me. Is that normal for a wizard? Harry could tell that he had withheld mention of this strangest power until that moment, determined to impress. It is unusual, said Dumbledore after a moment's hesitation, but not unheard of. His tone was casual, but his eyes moved curiously over Riddle's face. They stood for a moment, man and boy, staring at each other. Then the handshake was broken. Dumbledore was at the door. Goodbye, Tom. I shall see you at Hogwarts. So, we now need to think about comparing those two extracts. Make sure you've watched the video, and again, the clip of the extract from Harry Potter is slightly different than in the book, so make sure you're using the extract, not just everything from the clip. What was similar and what was different? So, I would like you to try this by yourself. Draw a table in your book and try and think of maybe 3 or 4 similarities and 3 or 4 differences between the two. In Monday's lesson, I will talk about what the similarities and what the differences were, and I will have marked your books to see whether your ideas were correct or not. So good luck, have a think. This one is really tricky, but I'm sure you can recognise some things that are similar and some things that are different.